We are good.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to our February webinar. This is our 2021 webinar series for Division 34, the Society for Environmental, Population, and Conservation Psychology. We're excited today to bring you three experts in many things, but what they'll be talking about today is teaching specifically. The title of this webinar is Teaching Psychology for Sustainability, How We Do It, and Lessons We've Learned. And we're welcoming today Dr. Britton Scott, Dr. Elise Amel, and Dr. Christie Manning. And I'll just share with you a little bit about each of them, and then they can share any more that they may want to about their biographies. But Dr. Scott is a social psychologist who has focused on two primary scholarly areas in her career, the psychology of gender and the psychology for environmental sustainability. She's the first author of Psychology for Sustainability, a Routledge publication, which is now in its 5th edition. She is also the co-creator of Teaching for Sustainability at teachgreenpsych.com. Elise Amel is an industrial organizational psychologist at the University of St. Thomas. She's an award-winning professor of psychology. She's chair of the Department of Earth, Environment, and Society. She's, along with Dr. Scott, is a past president for this society, for the Society for Environmental, Population, and Conservation Psychology. And she has co-authored an article in Science about the role of psychology in addressing environmental crises, along with the other two panelists here. And she's a co-author on that textbook I just mentioned. She currently directs the St. Thomas Office of Sustainability Initiatives, and she successfully led efforts at the University of St. Thomas to create a culture of sustainability leadership through systems-level changes, including committing to carbon neutrality, embracing sustainability as a strategic priority, developing a strategic sustainability action plan for the university, and creating a system for integrating sustainability across the curriculum. And Dr. Manning, Dr. Christie Manning, is the Director of Sustainability and a faculty member in the Department of Environmental Studies at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. Dr. Manning holds a PhD in cognitive and biological psychology and has recently co-authored 2021 academic textbook, which we just mentioned, Psychology for Sustainability. Also in 2018, she co-authored an edited volume, Psychology and Climate Change. And in 2017, that review article in Science, she was an author on that as well. The title of it is Beyond the Roots of Human Inaction, Fostering Collective Effort Toward Ecosystem Conservation. And her research focuses on how people respond to the climate crisis, and she's particularly interested in the psychological circumstances that motivate community-level climate action. So welcome to all three of you, and I will turn it over.
All right. Let's see.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm going to share my screen now, pull up our slides. Okay, there we go. So one thing I do want to add to our biographies is that we are all undergraduate teachers. So none of us have graduate students. So we're focusing on undergraduate teaching today. And we've all been doing it for more than 2 decades. So I guess that's worth mentioning. So here's our plan for today. We think it's ambitious. We realize we're mindful of the limited time. But what we'd like to do is just first give you a highlights reel of some different strategies we use to integrate psychology and sustainability in our teaching. And then we'd like to go through some of the core concepts that we have, through experience, learned seem to be really essential for students to get everyone a strong foundation for talking about psychology and sustainability. And then we'll quick point you to some resources. And then we'd like to open it up for conversation because we know many attendees of this webinar are also teaching at the intersection of psychology and sustainability. We'd love to hear what you're doing and answer any questions that you might have. So here's our first list. What we're gonna, this is the highlights reel I told you about. We're gonna whip through these different methods that we have for, that we've all done for integrating sustainability into psychology teaching. And they are from little teeny bite-sized ways of doing it to whole course ways of doing it.
So I think one of the easiest ways to get started integrating sustainability stuff into psych courses is by sneaking it in into your already established courses by basically replacing examples into presentations and activities and exams. Treat it like it's just another thing psychologists study. And so for instance, in a research method exam, you might have a question about independent and dependent variables, and using an applied example. All you have to do is swap out what you've got in there now and replace it with something that has a sustainability piece to it. So, something like consumerism as the IV and well-being as the DV, something like that. So lots of examples during class in presentations, but also in activities.
So I'll just add what you see represented on this slide are examples of how to teach a couple concepts: emotion focused, problem focused coping with sustainability content, or what is a construct, what does it mean to operationally define a construct. The image on the right represents a little mini lecture that I slide in general psychology when we talk about neurotransmitters and hormones, the chemicals in our bodies. I bring in exogenous chemicals, and it gives me an opportunity to educate them about Toxic Substances and Control Act and some other things like that. Pretty eye-opening, typically.
Yeah, students do notice.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, students do notice, and then they start asking questions. So it's really, really a sweet way to get the conversation started.
And then if you want to have the content be a little bit more, but you're not ready to actually overhaul a traditional psychology course, then in many subdisciplines in psychology, there are opportunities to put in a unit or even just one class period or a week, some coverage of psychology related to sustainability. So for instance, on the left on this slide, this is where I squeeze it in general psych. So toward the end of the semester, when we're talking about psychological distress and disorders and treatment, I also talk about factors that promote well-being and flourishing and positive psychology. And it seems like a natural place to bring in some psychological perspective from both eco-psychology and conservation psychology and even environmental psychology. And it's interesting, the student reaction. Students notice this too, of course, and I've even had students say, oh my goodness, I wish you had started the semester with this. That was the most engaging content of the entire semester. So I've gotten a receptive response. To do this, you might have to get creative. There are some textbooks, like you see in the center here, David Meyer's social psychology textbook. For the last several editions, he has had content in there on sustainability. It was a sort of an appendix for a while, and then he moved it into the main body of the text. There has been a general psychology textbook. Wayne Whiten's textbook used to have an appendix on sustainability that was co-authored by myself and Susan Koger at Willamette University. His publisher made him excise that, but I don't know what's been going on with other textbooks. So whatever your topic area is, you might be able to find a developmental psychology textbook that gives some attention to this, or a cognitive psychology textbook that does. Or you can kind of glom together your own resources. So our science article that Daniel mentioned is what's represented here on the right. And we have used that as a reading in a general psychology class. So you can put things together that way.
In fact, in our department, Britton and I are in the same department at the University of St. Thomas, and our department elected to include the science article as a reading across all intro psych courses. There's also an AAAS sponsored annotated version of the article that it's kind of intended for younger students, but it's still got a lot of relevant annotations for intro class. So Christie and I worked on a project about a decade ago to integrate sustainability as a theme throughout our introductory psych courses. And in contrast to the stealth method, basically you start the semester by managing students' expectations that this will be a theme throughout the semester, culminating in a project that has us applying different psychological principles to an environmental problem to solve. We actually did a pre-post quasi-experimental research data collection on this and found that we actually achieved our goal of having students really have a much elevated understanding of the role of psychology within environmental problem solving. Go ahead, Christie.
I would add that one of the most rewarding things about teaching this class for me was to see how students' abilities to think in terms of systems increased, because we were setting out connections in the beginning between conservation, sustainability, and psychology. And then as we progressed through the course, the students were making those connections by the end on their own. And as we all know as teachers, so much of this is all connected. And it really wasn't that difficult once we got started to make those connections between concrete sustainability or conservation or environmental themes and the psychological content. And the resources that Britton will share at the end can help if you want to undertake this challenge.
So if your institution supports it, of course, a really fun way to integrate psychology and sustainability is to offer a course that is a sustainability specific psychology course. And this can be a great way to bring in students from other disciplines. So for instance, at St. Thomas, I teach psychology for sustainability, and some of my students are psychology majors, but other students are environmental studies or environmental science majors who are focusing in natural sciences or political science or some other discipline. What you see on this slide is just a list of titles of some of the courses that we know about that some of our colleagues at different institutions offer or have offered, just to kind of give you an idea of what a sustainability specific psychology course might be about, might be called. Christie, you've taught psychology of environmental issues, is that right?
I've taught psychology and of sustainable behavior. And that class at Macalester, where I am, also I have applied for and gotten a general education designation for US identities and differences. And so about half the class is environmental studies or psychology majors, but then the other half is from all over campus. And that is very fun. It can also increase the challenge of the teaching experience. But like you said, it brings people into to a psychology class who might not otherwise take it. And it has created some psychology majors, new psychology majors, minors, and environmental studies majors and minors, because this combination is so eye-opening for students.
Gets them excited.
So as we all know, sustainability is a wicked problem, and so it requires interdisciplinary research and action. And I think one of the best ways to get students to see this is by team teaching with other faculty from other disciplines. And I think it's really valuable to use whatever pre-existing infrastructure you have at your university. So for instance, at St. Thomas, where Britton and I teach, there is a theology capstone experience where a theology professor links up with a faculty member from some other discipline. And we also have honors courses that are taught by two faculty from different disciplines. And, those are really great opportunities to strategically connect psychology and conservation with disciplines that are sort of non-intuitive partners in advancing people's thinking about sustainability. So, identity, norms, worldviews, these are all possible, discussion topics within some of these sort of interdisciplinary formats. And frankly, having a good title for whatever course you're teaching makes a big difference in recruiting people. When we named our honors course Save the Humans, oh my gosh, people were clamoring to get in, because of course that's a value people understand. And so it's a really great way to then help connect the dots.
So we're going to tack on here, these were not on the list that we showed you, a couple bonus ideas. These are things that we've done in these classes. These could be used in conjunction with any of those methods that we talked about. So one is community engagement, getting that active learning experience. So for instance, in my Psychology for Sustainability course, for several years, we have engaged in what St. Thomas calls a sustainable community partnership. And you can see examples of the projects that my students have worked on. They've worked on helping reduce litter on our Metro Transit light rail platforms, water conservation in one of the suburbs here, and how to create a walk-through experience at a community art park that will help people connect to nature and restore them. So, coming from conservation psychology, community-based social marketing, eco-psychology, the projects are different from year to year, but they give the students an opportunity to apply what they're learning. And it's a lot of work on the instructor's part, but the end result is definitely worth it. Elise, you've done some of these too.
Yeah, I typically do community-based work in my psychology of work class. And part of that course is understanding jobs and understanding the human resource systems that are developed surrounding jobs in an organization, everything from selection and training of new folks to performance evaluation and that kind of thing. And yeah, we've developed new jobs for a couple different cities, which frankly, new jobs are a rare thing to be able to work on. So it was both exciting from like, a plain, HR, human resource perspective, but also it brought in this sustainability component, and people started realizing that, wow, no matter what job you have, you can actually change it to be more sustainable. And that was a real light bulb moment for those students.
I'll just add very quickly that in general, the applying the psychology in these community projects, the comment I hear most often is, oh my God, this psychology stuff actually works.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it actually works.
Well, and then I
just
want to say one more thing. The side benefit then is for the cities in your region to make advancements in their own sustainability work, which, at a systems level is so important, right?
Mm-hmm. Another experiential technique that we've all used is travel component, or the whole course being a travel course. So on the left of the slide, you see a few very dated pictures with a very young me when I've offered an eco-psychology course. And I've done it a couple different ways. I did it during a summer session. So the whole course was located at an environmental learning center that's a couple hours north of the Twin Cities. Then I also did a version where it was a traditional semester on campus course, but with a spring break embedded component. So the students, when they register for that course, had to agree to give up their spring break plans for the spring break trip with the class. But it included excursions into the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, and as well as working with naturalists at the Learning Center and traditional instruction as well. So that can be a really visceral way to bring their learning to them. And then you guys,
and then
a really exciting class.
Elise and I have collaborated 5 times now on a J-term class, conservation or psychology of sustainability in Germany and Denmark. And we bring a group of students mindful that there is a lot of carbon emissions involved in bringing a group of students over to Germany and Denmark for a 3-week experience that does often involve a lot of beer on their parts, but they also experience a place that the infrastructure and the social norms, the policies are much different with respect to sustainability, and they come to feel the joy of experiencing sustainability, engaging in sustainable living when the culture and the policies support it. And it is so eye-opening. We're very proud of the number of climate activists who have come out of this class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not only do we cover the topical areas that are typical in our field, the way we structure the class by using a lot of walking and biking and public transportation frees us up financially to do some of the more expensive sustainable things like staying in an organic hotel or making sure our meals are vegan and organic and that kind of thing. So there are some financial aspects to creating a class that's sustainable that actually has quite a bit of benefit.
Great. All right, so now we're going to shift to some of these concepts that we've talked about, or that I said we have learned are really essential. And as you have gathered, we get a diverse assortment of students in our classes. So they're not all psychology students, they're not all environmental studies or environmental science students. And so we find that it's really important to get people on kind of a similar solid foundation. And there are certain concepts where we've seen gaps. I guess we could put it that way. And so these are the things that we think we really have to cover in each and every class. So one is, we always want to establish, to help people understand the connection between psychology and sustainability, that the concept of environmental problems is a incorrect label, that all the so-called environmental problems are actually human behavioral problems. So just starting with that premise can really open a lot of people's eyes. And then we think it's really important to give them a taste of history, right, Christie?
And as Britton was saying, this is one of the important gaps that we realized when we initially started teaching the classes, psychology of sustainability, that students really don't have a strong sense of the history of the environmental movement, a history of the human race and industrialization and the Western worldview, and also how the power of movements like settler colonialism, how that has shaped how we view our relationship to resources and to other communities and to the natural world.
Yeah, the thing that I find myself emphasizing so strongly to students is how what we look at today as the ecological crisis, how very recent this all is, how there are roots to this worldview that stem way back, but really this is a very recent phenomenon, and they seem pretty well oblivious to basically developments in the 20th century, I find. So my students many of them don't, and I'm not disparaging my students, it's just the reality. They don't seem to know the difference between the 1960s and the 1940s or the 1920s. They don't understand, when the world wars were. They don't understand the effect that those world wars had on technology and quote unquote progress and everyday lifestyles in the US, as an example. And so we really talk a lot about, well, how long has plastic really been around? And how long have there been synthetic chemicals and these things that we take for granted in our everyday lives? Just when did people start to have cars and television sets and things like that? And they are pretty much blown away when they really face the history. So we find that really, really important. Trying to get my little thing to show up. There we go.
So, our students are so embedded in the dominant social paradigm that they don't really even have the language of how to be different. And so we spend time helping them understand, what some of the inconsistent worldview concepts are that are, they aren't consistent with our current planetary realities. So we have a set of heuristics that are consistent with what's going on with our planetary ecology. And so most students are familiar with there being limits to growth, for instance, because they grew up, reading the Lorax or seeing that film, or they've been recycling paper because they want to save trees, that kind of thing. So that's an example of sort of ecological worldview heuristic that you can start with, so they can feel like they're not completely incompetent. And then you introduce some things that they're just less able to grasp, within our current system, like how interdependent humans are within the planetary system. So there are activities you can do, like Joanna Macy's systems activity. You can talk about how turning on a light is related to mercury biomagnification, and you can talk about how the activities along the Mississippi River from each household impact what's going on in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, so there are lots of ways to help students understand these larger systems and how humans are an integral part of that, and how sometimes in these large complex systems, you change one thing and it leads to unintended consequences. And we talk about what some of those things are, like, the example of making ethanol fuel and how that impacted food prices for people, and that kind of thing. Understanding our current take, extract, make things and throw them away linear system, and contrast it to the circular systems of how natural planetary ecology works. And then also the value of diversity and redundancy in systems in order to maintain resilience under stress. And we actually have some really great activities to help illustrate these things, and it creates a shared language then that can help us identify really good questions to ask, and it helps us set criteria for, like, if you've got a couple different choices, which one is more consistent with these ecological worldviews. So these heuristics serve a lot of different purposes that help students navigate the classes.
So at the beginning of my Psychology for Sustainability course, we use the ecological footprint tool as a conversation starter. And one of the questions I have students reflect on is whether reducing one's ecological footprint necessarily means reducing one's quality of life. And it's interesting to see how they think about quality of life at the beginning of the semester compared to once we've been through several weeks of the semester, we circle back around to the basic theme that what's good for the planet is good for us. And so we look at all of these ways that more sustainable lifestyle choices are also what is most healthy for humans physically and mentally. And I find that kind of saving this for later in the semester works really well, because they've been thinking a lot more, and then it kind of reseals the deal, if you will. They get a second sort of dose of motivation why this all really matters. That's very personal. In the beginning, when they're learning about the systemic ecological crisis, the horror of that, the they're overwhelmed, and that's one way to think about what's going on. But to also just bring it back home to one's own personal well-being. And these days, college students can definitely relate when you talk about anxiety and depression, and being sedentary and unhealthy and tired and all these kinds of things, and then relating those to using one's body. Use a rake instead of a leaf blower, eat nutrient-dense organic food instead of industrial ultra-processed products and things like that. And they start seeing the connections. And so that's, I think, a really valuable piece to have in there. They seem to respond very well to it.
So like many of us have experienced, students tend to lack confidence that, what they can do as one person can actually make a difference. So they have a lot of feelings of helplessness and anxiety. And so we try to emphasize how individuals are part of many large systems, and that action within those systems can make a huge difference. And so we talk about social networks and how information and action passes through social networks, both interpersonal, but also even the media, social media. We emphasize political action, everything from voting to indirect or direct activism, to running for office, and how those things can change the political system. We talk about organizations like school and work and clubs, and how action within those organizations and leadership of others within those organizations really does make a much bigger difference than sort of what we would consider private sphere behaviors, which is often what we hear about in the media, or when students are talking to each other. It's like, do you recycle? Do I not recycle? Well, yes, it's important to recycle, but let's talk about how you can do your job differently, or let's talk about how you can engage others in changing government priorities and that kind of thing. And we also talk about how working together really increases people's experienced positive emotions and their sense of empowerment, and how doing some things together with collective action really helps it be more fun, it helps it be more effective, and it tends to lead to further action.
There we go.
And the final concept that we all find essential in teaching psychology and sustainability or conservation is the idea of environmental justice, or the theme of environmental justice. And we acknowledge early in the class when we teach, and it's also in the textbook that we co-authored, that the history of the environmental movement is also the history of structural racism and racialized violence, that the people who benefited from nature in early, especially American history, tended to be the white people who settled, colonized, pushed aside violently the Native Americans, and also relied on slaves, the transatlantic slave trade, to build this country. And nature was seen as a refuge for these rugged outdoors men who wanted to save nature for their place to relax, and for the reputation of the United States in contrast to European countries. So this was early American history. And the environmental movement, unfortunately, sort of followed that trajectory. Meanwhile, side by side, even earlier than the civil rights movement, when we start to see the environmental justice movement emerge, we see people coming together to think about the environment and sustainability in a very different way. It's about community and cultural preservation. It is about fair access to resources. It is about preserving and protecting what we rely on for everybody. And throughout the teaching of psychology and sustainability, we see the many ways that sustainability and conservation have been inequitable, have been racialized, and we have to talk about it as part of this class, especially today, and especially we're here in the Twin Cities, where there racial uprisings began after the murder of George Floyd. And so it's become even more important in the teaching of this topic.
And I would add the line 3 pipeline from Enbridge is a real flashpoint here for good reason, because it impacts Indigenous lands where the government is violating, their sovereignty. So, on several fronts, this is very relevant to our students.
So here's the book that you've been hearing about. And this isn't actually just a commercial for our book, but it should be no surprise when you glance at the chapter titles here and the structure of this book in the table of contents, that everything we've been talking about shows up somewhere. That's why it's structured the way it is because when we took this book over, we didn't start this book. It is the 5th edition, but it started out as Deborah Dunan Winter's 1996 Ecological Psychology, Healing the Planet, there's Healing the Split Between the Planet and Self book, which is a slim little volume, and it was a pioneering text. And then Susan Koger came on as a second author, and they turned it into the Psychology of Environmental Problems. And then they swapped position, and Sue was the first author on the 3rd edition. Also, the Psychology of Environmental Problems, Psychology for Sustainability. And then I came on for the 4th edition as the first author, and we gave it a major overhaul. So this structure just has been with the 4th edition and now this 5th edition. And I put some live links in here, but Daniel, maybe we can share these links some other way, after the webinar, just to the description of the book in case you think it might be a useful textbook for you. And also we had to write abstracts for the chapters that the publisher's using for their, promoting the book. And so I made a version of those chapter abstracts for all of you. So we can get those links to you. And I get my little thing to me. And then the other resource that you've heard us mention, and Daniel mentioned, is teachgreenpsych.com, which has been around since 2006. And this was an effort of myself and Sue Koger. We wanted to provide some sort of kind of instructor's manual for teaching psychology and sustainability, and nothing like that existed. And so we applied for and got a grant from the Office of Teaching Resources in Psychology to fund the first iteration of this. And in our proposal, it was going to be a print instructor's manual. And then in the process, we realized this has got to be a website. That's the only way it's going to get out to people. And so we created this website, and we envisioned it as a crowdsourced kind of thing before we even knew what the concept of crowdsourcing was. And so we did get some contributions from people who were teaching relevant things. And but we, this thing, of course, it's not always highest on our priority list to be updating this. And it could definitely use some more overhauling. It could use an infusion of new content. It's gotten some updates along the way, but any of you out there who are doing anything, we would love to have contributions. So I'll see if the Zoom screen share will follow me. If I link to it, did my window show for you guys that? Oh, no, it didn't. Okay, I'm gonna, it's okay if I stop sharing and then reshare to show you this window here real quick. Okay, I'll do that. I just want to show people what's on here right now.
While she's doing that, Daniel, have there been any questions or things in the chat that?
There are a few questions. And I was going to say too, Britton, if you want to share those links you created, we can share them here in the chat, and then we can also share it out to the division listserv afterward if you want to.
Okay, cool. So are you guys seeing the site now?
Yes.
Okay, and if I click on here, did it change?
Yes.
Okay, so it's the live site. Okay, so you can see we've got on here some different areas, some traditional subdisciplines in psychology, and so there are different pages for each of those, and then different areas in psychology related to natural world. And we've got a collection of syllabi and course descriptions from instructors. That's where we'd love to have more examples. So in each one of these, if we just go to one just for instance, you see there are lecture discussion topics and multimedia resources and all this kind of stuff. So that's what that is all about. So I guess we just had one more slide here that I'll just put up because what the heck? It's that. This is where we'd like to open it up to questions and contributions. And I will, while that gets going, I'll get those links and put them in the chat.
I can read one of the questions that showed up on the Q&A. Do we have any methods, silver bullets for measuring the effectiveness of these education programs? We get lots of questions about the effectiveness of our environmental education programs, and the funding organizations are asking for metrics and proof. That is a tough one. And we, Elise and I, published an article, it was probably 10 years ago now, on the teaching of psychology, and we used a survey that we constructed, and yeah, so
what we did was we collected the responses to the question at the beginning of the semester, both in our 3 sections that had this theme, and compared it to, I think, 5 sections that didn't have the theme, that were taught the same semester, this, same span of time during the day, and, that kind of thing. So comparable, but with different faculty. And the pre-test scores showed no difference between any of the classes, and the post-test scores for the sections with the environmental sustainability theme showed an increase, while those that didn't have the theme stayed the same. So it was really quite a sort of, textbook example of the interaction you see with the pre-test, post-test, quasi-experimental control group design.
But the measures we used were specific to the goals we had for the course, as opposed to something that would show some other form of effectiveness. It was effective for what we were trying to do.
But there are some validated measures of, environmental behavior or environmental attitudes, or things that you can draw on if you need to use a validated measurement tool. Those are actually found in chapter 4 of our textbook.
The next question is, what is happening with adding psychology of sustainability course and its content to graduate programs in psychology, public policy, environmental economics, and environmental science, environmental resources? That is a good question. As we are all at undergraduate institutions, not sure what is going on at the graduate school level. Perhaps somebody else who knows can weigh in on that in the chat. And how do you support students with their difficult emotions during the semester, such as eco-anxiety? That is very much something that we have to think about when we teach this class. And the new updated edition of the book has a huge section on exactly that. I'll just share my experience, and that is that the empowerment students feel through the community engagement and the active parts of practicing applying the knowledge they're getting from the class and working together as a class community really alleviates a lot of the anxiety. It's not to say that it's not there, but that we explicitly think about it, talk about it, and practice taking action. And that does seem to leave students feeling empowered rather than anxious.
Yes, and as Christie said, that we really came to the realization that this was such an important issue that chapter 12 in the textbook is a brand new chapter that wasn't in the previous edition, and it's all about how to stay healthy, how to stay positive, how to not get completely overwhelmed by eco-anxiety and discouragement and burnout and all of that.
Right. social support. I mean, it's the traditional psychology stuff, right? It's social support, it's humor, it's, you know, that kind of thing.
Seligman's PERMA model of happiness, things like that.
Next question is, I'm teaching a course in the fall entitled Apocalypse Now, Finding Agency and Hope in a Disintegrating World. It's cross-listed with environmental studies and American studies, but I'm a psychologist, so this is very helpful. My question is, what kind of projects might work during the COVID clampdown? I'll offer one because a student just emailed me, a former student just emailed me, and she is working with, it's either Fossil-Free California or it's the Sunrise Movement, a chapter of the Sunrise Movement in California, and she wrote to ask if the class I'm teaching this summer would partner with their organization to help them do a communications, online virtual communications campaign about the work that they're doing. And so a communications type or education type of project that is online is probably what I'm going to be doing with my class. Elise and Britton, your ideas?
Well, and that's right up the students' alley, right? They, through their, you know, living through the social media revolution, have, you know, really an interest in doing sort of online work like that. So it's not as foreign to them as it is to us to work remotely and do that kind of thing.
That's true. It occurs to me also that, you know, of course, the COVID situation and sustainability are not separate at all. And there are so many connections that can be made explicitly between what's going on with the pandemic and sustainability. We actually, because we were still writing feverishly on the book this summer, we put some of that in different places. And so, you know, maybe making a project where that is actually the focus, where it's not like, oh, COVID is limiting us what we can do right now, so how do we do a sustainability thing? Maybe the project content could be about the intersection of those two things.
I would also add that we're thinking about all these virtual projects because of the COVID clampdown, and to balance that out, I would urge all of us to have the students also do something that is hands in dirt, such as, Elise, I know you have had students planting seeds, right? And so giving them a little egg carton cup and some potting soil. I don't know how, if they're all remote, but so that they can have something while they're doing all this online work that connects them back to what I think of as reality. So let's see, another couple questions. Linda says, idea for project, something related to PPE, personal protective equipment, that is maybe addressing the huge waste issue of all that PPE. That's a great idea. And Ada asks, a 2019 APA survey showed that more than half of adult Americans haven't taken any action to protect the environment because they don't know where to start. What are some of the most effective ways of helping people adopt planet-friendly behaviors, particularly in our highly polarized society?
What I always tell my students is that the first thing they need to do is listen to whoever they are talking to, you know, because talking to each other ends up being an antidote to pluralistic ignorance, right? You know, nobody talks about it, and then you think everybody else doesn't believe in climate change or want to have anything to do with it. So talking about it, I think, is really important. But you know, we can talk over somebody or talk somebody away from us, you know, just talking to people about our passions in a way that really pushes folks away. So I think it's important first to listen to the people we're in conversation with, to find out what they value, and then help them connect the dots between sustainable behavior and what another person values.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Elise and Christie, but as far as my students are concerned, the students that I get in my classes, unless I was using the stealth method, they know what the class is about, and they're already somewhat motivated and on board and at least curious. And so, but what happens is, they write reflections for me, and they're talking about their interactions, their subsequent interactions with their parents, with other, with their other family members and so forth. And so, it is the $1 million question. How do you get people started? But one of the things that the students tell me is that when they share what they're learning with the people close to them, that sometimes they get a positive response. Sometimes that, it gets the whole household, the whole family interested in maybe starting to make some baby steps. So it's the talking thing, like you said, Elise.
It is so fascinating how so much of the work of the world relies on relationships. And so talking about that through the social psychology portion of any of these classes, and how we are social creatures, and so much of our influence comes from our relationships with others, and those relationships being authentic and based on listening rather than just telling people what they need to do, what they should be doing.
We actually get a surprising number of students taking the psychology for sustainability in Germany and Denmark, not because of that it's about sustainability or psychology, but because there's beer in Germany and Denmark. And it's pretty interesting to watch those students evolve over the course of 3 weeks. And it is because of the norms that are developed. Because they can still, these particular students are reticent about the content of the class, but it's the social interactions between the students who are like way into it and to find joy in it, that sort of bring these, students along. And some of the students who started out being really uninterested end up being pretty substantive advocates once they get back to campus.
And also being in the completely different cultural context where the norms of interacting outside in the world are so different, and hearing Germans talk about, well, of course we need to replace all of our coal-fired power plants and nuclear plants with solar and wind, of course. And of course I'm not going to take my car if I'm only going to drive 4 blocks. Why would I drive my car? And having those kinds of interactions is also at first mind-boggling, but then very growth opportunities for a lot of the students who come back thinking, oh, why don't we do that here in the United States?
So we're getting a few questions in the chat as well as the Q&A, and one of those was related to what you're just talking about. Do you have any tips or suggestions for resources for how to get started planning and organizing a sustainability-focused study abroad experience? So that's kind of a big question, but I don't know if you all would be available, Elise and Christie, sort of after the fact, to be contacted about that, because
because we just sort of made it up along the way.
Well, and you had some infrastructure to work with. It's St. Thomas in particular is got a very strong study abroad just infrastructure. So
yeah, it's true. Like the study abroad itself was not something we had to develop, but turns out, when we're bringing in some of our ideas about how to navigate the world, it's sometimes works against what their practices are. You arrive someplace, everybody gets into a tour bus and you go drive around a city, and it's like, well, that's a terrible way to experience another city, but it's also not sustainable. So it was really a mindset that helped us develop the specific strategies within the class to be more sustainable.
We can put our emails in the chat, or reach out to us.
Another interesting question in the chat. In your classes, do you discuss the religious roots of the ecological crisis? And how important/relevant do you think these discussions are? I teach in the Deep South, where religious fundamentalism abounds. I find it rather tricky bringing religion into the conversation without turning my students off. Somehow I manage and still think it's important. However, at times I question the pragmatism of these discussions.
Well, I've actually co-taught a theology in the environment course, and I actually think you can pull these things in. Actually, I don't have a lot of experience with the Deep South, so it could be that the way folks think about religion is different in the South than it is, say, we teach at a Catholic institution, and except for the most extremely conservative Catholics, people believe that religion is an evolving, living thing. And I think this is also consistent in Judaism and Buddhism. And so if students are open to the idea of evolving ideas, I think you can bring religion into the discussion pretty effectively, because when people see that their own values line up with sustainability, then it doesn't become an identity barrier.
I hope people are monitoring the chat as well, because there are some good suggestions coming through there. So in fact, someone, Marcia, posted, have them watch Catherine Hayhoe, because evangelist and a climate scientist. So,
and one other, go ahead, Elise.
I was just gonna talk about a question in the Q&A, but go ahead, finish.
I was just gonna say that another related to the religion issue and identity in particular is partisanship. And I have found introducing the work of Jonathan Haidt and the moral pillars that underlie liberal versus conservative decision making is really helpful to bring some empathy for the people who hold the opposite view, and to see that the way we think about the world is rooted in values, even though they might not be values that we emphasize as much as somebody holding a different worldview. And especially because Jonathan Haidt also is a conservative who believes we need to take climate action. So that is also his own perspective on the issues, helps share that with students who are more hesitant because of their political identity.
I'd be happy to share the syllabus from the theology and the environment course. There's another interesting question. Are you also looking at the topic of misinformation? Christie, do you want to take that?
We touch on it in the book just a little bit, and we delve into it more in my class in the cognitive section, and we again we explore it from the angle of we can't assume that people are stupid, but in fact it is about how people filter out information based on their identity, based on the sources that they consider trustworthy, and so we look at it from that cognitive and identity perspective.
Yeah, and in the textbook, it also comes up in our social psych chapter under persuasion, and we talk about science skepticism, and we talk about the people, the blue feed and the red feed, and that kind of idea. So yeah, it's become a more urgent topic to talk about because of social media.
There's one other question that we can address really quickly in the Q&A about the courses, what level, if they are upper division or lower division. And my psychology of sustainable behavior is a middle level class, and I let first years into it with a warning that they'll be with students, upper level juniors and seniors. I don't know, what about you two?
Yeah, that's the same for psychology for sustainability. I've offered it, we have 4 levels at St. Thomas. I've offered it both at the 200 level and the 300 level. I prefer it at the 300 level because I can be a little bit more demanding of them, but.
I think that you can do it at any level, and it just is a matter of scale, probably, and complexity.
And I just want to say, I want to wish Jenny out there good luck with getting your course approved for next time around. These are tough times at all colleges and universities because of COVID, and so hang in there and send a note if you need moral support.
So, you know, that sort of makes me think of institutional channels, because you know, your first run got cut due to low enrollment. So you might consider strategies for increasing enrollment by connecting with other departments who have similar goals for their students. You know, especially if you can link your course with what environmental studies and environmental science might be up to. They often overlook social sciences, especially psychology, as an important skill set for their graduates. And so, you know, maybe reach out and talk about your class with some of the faculty who are advising students. You know, and you could even encourage like a psychology minor if your school has minors, to folks who would otherwise be studying maybe natural sciences.
All right, looks like our time's up, Daniel.
Oh, this has been fantastic, and I think you actually managed to answer almost all of the questions. So that would be,
Hey,
I think. So congratulations. It has been our absolute pleasure to welcome you here to this forum. And yeah, I'm seeing a lot of accolades, which are well deserved.
Oh,
So
thank you.
for folks who are interested in passing this talk along, as I said, we'll edit it and upload it a little bit later, probably in a week or so, to the Division 34 YouTube channel. So look for it there. If you have any questions about contacting Dr. Scott or Dr. Amel or Dr. Manning, you can reach out to me or them. So thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you. Good luck, everybody.
bye-bye.